Saints, we're coming up on the 14th Sunday after Pentecost. But who's counting? I don't want to count, but it is 14 Sundays since Pentecost Sunday back in June. Lord have mercy. One of the Psalms is Psalm 14 in the lectionary this week, and David wrote Psalm 14, and it's very similar to Psalm 53. They are strikingly similar. And the psalm opens with really stark words. They open with, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." Now, that's not about intellectual struggle or honest doubt. It's about the posture of a heart that refuses God's reality, that chooses to live as though God were absent. The fool isn't just the skeptic with arguments. It's the person who lives without reverence, without obedience, and without reference to the one who made heaven and earth. And the psalmist doesn't stop with the singular fool. The psalmist, David, looks out and sees a whole world bent away from God, even amongst the people he serves as king. He says, all have turned aside. There's none who does good. It's a picture of humanity estranged, of people feeding on one another instead of feeding on the bread of life. Injustice is multiplying because hearts are closed to the Lord. But the psalm doesn't leave us there, thank God. The Lord looks down from heaven and he searches for those who are wise enough to know he is, and those who, because they know he is, seek him for who he is. And so here comes the shift. God is in the company of the righteous. The Lord is their refuge. So even when the fool denies God, God doesn't abandon his people. He stands among the afflicted. He dwells with those who call on his name. And the psalm builds to a deep cry of longing. What's the cry? Oh, that Israel's deliverance would come out of Zion. So it's a messianic prayer. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, Jacob will rejoice and Israel will be glad. Now, guess what that's referring back to? David's going back to the story of Jacob being overwhelmed at the fact that his son Joseph is alive, and the wagons came to let him know there was bounty, and he just had to get on the wagons and be brought to restoration so that they could live in Goshen. That's what that story is about. So here's where hope breaks in. The God who sees corruption also sees his covenant people. Now, we could compare that to where we live today. And the God who hears the devourers also hears the cry of the afflicted. That's good news for us. And from Zion, where his presence dwells, that's the church, he sends deliverance. That's where we stand in Christ, the deliverer who came from Zion, who triumphed over death and sin and the grave and the folly of human pride that we could make it without God. And Christ has poured out his Spirit on all flesh, so that in the middle of a world that denies God, you and I, as his people, live as witnesses of his presence. We don't end in despair. We end in, let's call it Pentecostal confidence. God is in the midst of his people. God is the one who restores what's been lost. God is the one who turns our mourning into dancing. God is the one who raises up a people that are filled with the Spirit, who will not be consumed by the fool's denial, but will be carried by the flame and the fire of God's presence. And that's why David closes with, "Lift your eyes to Zion. Deliverance has come." And the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is inviting us to practice resurrection, because Jesus is about restoring the fortunes of his people. And Jacob still is rejoicing in the cloud of witnesses, and Israel will be glad, and the church will rise filled with the Spirit, proclaiming our God reigns.